And back with another edition of what I call the smartest people I know, because in this crazy time, calling on the smartest people you know to learn everything that you need to learn about how to navigate this pandemic is probably not a bad idea. And I'm fortunate enough to have lots of great friends, including my guest today. Those of you that know me in the Arizona wine world recognize that last name. This is Ian Glomski. He is a I'm gonna hold off for a second, getting into your who you are and what you're all about.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I met. I don't know if you remember, this is trivia. We met on a river cruise in France that your brother was leading along with Sam Pillsbury, and it was very serendipitous. We just walked up to the captain's table there, that basically to get seated for dinner. And the very first night of the cruise, we sat and had dinner with you guys, met you and Zoo, and it was cool.
Yeah, that was a great trip. That was the Rhone. So
yeah. And then Eric came and said, "Hey, you met my brother." So the reason I wanted to talk to Ian today is this is going to sound crazy, but he's actually a distiller today, a distiller of spirits in Charlottesville, Virginia. But prior to that is really why I wanted to talk to Ian today. So Ian, why don't you kind of give us the nickel tour of your background and how it's, obviously we'll talk about, it'll be, I think, pretty obvious why I have you on today.
Well, I really do consider myself an infectious disease microbiologist, which led me into distilling because there's a lot of connections there. But no, I've been studying microbiology since the mid-90s. And I started working on my Ph.D. In 97. But even before that, I was working in a biotech company doing research to develop antibiotics. So, so I went and got my Ph.D. at Berkeley. I studied this organism called Listeria monocytogenes. And that's basically the organism that makes pregnant women sick. When you're like, I'm not sure if you've ever been pregnant before, but
no, I try to avoid it at all costs.
Yeah, but when you become pregnant, they tell you not to eat like cold cuts or unpasteurized cheeses and things of that sort. Huh. And that's because primarily of Listeria monocytogenes. It's an organism that we eat all the time, but it happens to be that pregnant women are particularly susceptible to it. And that's why it's an important thing to study and learn more about.
You also studied in France at the Institut
Pasteur.
Yeah. Even people that didn't pay attention in high school should know that name.
Oh yeah, I mean pasteurization. That's what it's all about. But yeah, so that's what so I was basically working on my infectious disease bacteriology infectious disease stuff at Berkeley on my PhD when the anthrax attacks happened in the United States. So at that point, there were a bunch of resources and interest that were then pouring into studying anthrax. And essentially one of the most central places in the history of anthrax research is the Pasteur Institute in Paris. So that attracted me. I basically wanted to learn more about anthrax, and I went to the home of anthrax in Paris, and I did a postdoctoral fellowship there. So once I had my PhD in hand, I started looking for our next home, and that ended up being the Pasteur Institute, and I studied anthrax. I worked both on a vaccine that had been developed by the French army for anthrax, really trying to figure out how to determine why it worked and why other vaccines didn't work and stuff. So it was basic research with a practical means to an end, I guess.
Very focused, very specific, yeah.
Yeah, but I also developed technologies to help study things like that better. This doesn't sound like crazy, but I developed a light-emitting anthrax that you could put inside of a mouse. And then using really sensitive cameras, you could actually see the spread of the anthrax through the mouse and where it would physically move, and then do various treatments and things of that sort to see how treatments affected the growth and spread of anthrax inside of a mouse without ever cutting it open or anything like that. So it was real time. You could basically have a video camera on it. You didn't have to hurt the mouse in the process. You use much fewer mice, and it's better quality data and stuff. So I did a lot of technology development too.
So it wasn't all just writing grants and pushing paper around. Huh?
At that point, once I became a professor back here in the United States at the University of Virginia, that became a lot more writing grants and pushing paper around and stuff. So
okay, so I think we made the case when it comes to microbiology. It's not like it's a singular focus. You, starting at 18, jumped into the beer making process,
yeah,
which is. It sounds like your career path was intertwined between alcohol and microbiology, or one led to the other.
Yeah, no, that's what there was. I think it'd be fair to say I became a microbiologist because of making beer. I mean, when I went to college, I couldn't buy beer, but I could buy barley, yeast, and hops. So started brewing and making it myself, DIY. But I went through a phase of making crappy beer. So I basically signed up for a microbiology course, and my extra credit project was isolating all the organisms that were growing in my crappy beer. And that got me into microbiology. So I had basically, and to this day, I still make beer, and I've won like amateur awards with beer and all that too. But I kind of had a booze making career, and then a infectious disease making career running in parallel for a very long time.
Okay, so I think we've set the table as to why I wanted to talk to you. I think you have a very incredibly unique background and probably point of view on a lot of stuff that's going on. And really, I don't want to get into the weeds of the science, because none of us outside of you and your friends will probably even
Yeah.
So I wanted to really talk about some really, really basic stuff. So when you see what's going on with COVID-19, your background, I would imagine a lot of the stuff that you're hearing in the news, and you're hearing these research papers, you're hearing all this stuff, and you got to be shaking your head, like constantly going, come on. So
I try not to be like, that being said, I am coming from a pretty extreme background in comparison to anthrax, in comparison to smallpox, in comparison to the bubonic plague. Coronavirus is not one of those things. It is certainly dangerous. I mean, who knows what the mortality rate is going to end up being. The numbers we have right now are not probably reflective of the reality, because we're just not testing enough people. We only test sick people. So the percentage of people that die that have it is being skewed by that fact. We'll see in the long run, once we get a kind of hindsight view about how many people were actually infected and how many people died, I think the mortality rate is going to go down significantly.
Yeah. So, I mean, suffice it to say, we don't know enough about it. And so to be careless is kind of goofy.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what I think is probably the most misunderstood and controversial, not controversial, but just probably the most misunderstood aspect of what people feel like they should or shouldn't be doing. And that is the mask.
Yeah.
Early on, the government, everyone was saying you don't need masks. And it was primarily because they didn't want people going out and getting an N95 mask or some medical mask that they they absolutely had no reason to have, and kill the supply, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people still remembering what they were saying about masks early in this, and it's been what, month and a half? It seems like a year ago, right?
It's amazing.
And everything's changed so much. So you've been in a situation where you need to wear protective, like probably the ultimate protective gear, right?
Yeah.
So walk us through, as average human beings that are, I grew up in Japan, so I understand culturally in the Asian countries, as soon as you start to feel anything at all, as a respect to the society and the culture, you always put a mask on. So that's, it's been in the Asian cultures forever.
Yeah.
It's so foreign here. And I think people have a visceral response to both being seen with the mask or putting it on. And so I thought, having a little more of a conversation about it as it pertains to the average Joe.
Yeah.
Tell us the pros and cons and whether people should be wearing masks or not.
Yeah. So there are definitely pros and cons. I think the common misperception, I think you alluded to this, But the common misperception is that a mask protects you. It keeps you from getting sick from people that have an airborne disease. That is pretty unlikely. So, like we mentioned, I used to work on anthrax, and that is a pretty major aerosol, kind of air-driven risk. And so we had to use masks. Honestly, we use like face masks that go onto your face as a backup. We usually wore the hoods. They're called powered PAPRs, powered air purifying respirators, where it's a big hood over your head and it's constantly blowing air in, so it's flowing out by your face and then outward. Those are much more comfortable. So that's what we usually use, and they're better protection. But in case your battery went out or something like that, we would have to have backup N95 mask that we would put on our face. But to do that, we would actually try a couple dozen different makers of those N95 masks. You have to find the one that really fits you properly. And we'd put them on our face. They put a big hood over our heads, and then they'd spray quinine, basically the bitter stuff that's in tonic water. They'd spray that in there. And if you could taste that at all, that meant that that mask is not doing its job, and you're basically tasting bitterness because it's not filtering out enough air to protect you. And I had to go through like a dozen different masks to get one that even got close to sealing it off well enough. And you can't have any facial hair at all. You have to have a very clean cut, because otherwise all that air just zips around the edges.
So it's like those of us that have facial hair go snorkeling and the water gets in and what have you.
Exactly. And that's why, I don't know if this is currently true, but firefighters were not allowed to have facial hair because their respirators had to have a tight enough fit to protect them from noxious fumes and stuff like that when they're fighting fires. And we also had to go in every 6 months. We had to get respiratory strength tests, because when that thing is truly fitting properly on your face, your diaphragm and your lungs have to be strong enough to drive air in and out. That's how tight the fit should be. If most of the air is being pushed through the filter, it should be tough to move air in and out. And the chances of like the dust mask that people are using right now, that's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to filter out incoming materials. The place where it does matter and helps, and this has been in the news too, is when you are sick and you sneeze or cough or something, it does help contain those droplets within your facial area or whatever. So there's a certain amount of reasonableness to that. That being said, having every single person wear them is also a little bit of a risk also, because really, those things get gross. They start growing stuff on them. Like if you don't sanitize or have a disposable or something like that, and you're wearing that thing every single day, maybe you're keeping COVID or the coronavirus from hitting other people. But then you're growing a bunch of mold and stuff in there too, and you're inhaling mold and stuff. Like honestly, like you have to think about that stuff. If you're wearing that mask for a week.
I think a lot of people, because they're not N95 masks, and they're not disposables, they're reusable like cloth, right? So it's a matter of basically just laundering that pretty regularly, or maybe having a bunch of them that you rotate around.
Yeah.
But certainly, I think, any other piece of clothing that you wear over and over again without washing gets crusty. I think that should be pretty obvious.
Well, and that's wet. I mean, the condensation from your breath and everything, that's like the perfect environment for things to grow. So you have to be really conscious about that. And that's why traditionally in the medical situations, they're disposable, and you wear it for a couple hours and throw it out. Yeah. But in a situation where you're using cloth and you're reusing them, and I don't know how many people usually have on hand, but it's a concern. I mean, there's other things you can get sick from.
So when you're going to the grocery store, you're going out, you're going to be in public. The basic reason for you to wear a mask is really to keep you from spreading anything that you may have.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah. And honestly, right now, I'm wearing a face shield. I'm not wearing a mask. I actually have like one of those. It's like a plastic thing in front of me, because I find it more comfortable. Sure. But it's achieving. If I sneeze, it's just going to make a disgusting screen for me. It's not going to hit anybody else. And so I'm doing a face shield right now. Okay. But
well, I was going to ask you next. When you go grocery shopping, what do you do?
Yeah. So I do a face shield. I don't do gloves.
I don't either. To me, gloves are just a secondary part of. I mean,
it's another one of those things where like the only way that they're not going to prevent spread. Like it's the same surface as your hands. It's just if you're tossing them out every 5 minutes, yeah, maybe that'd work. But if you're wearing it for an hour, you touch one thing, you touch another. It's better to just wash your hands. And
because you're not going to wash the gloves.
no.
So, but I think part of it is, and let's talk about both this and the food issue. I think part of it is people don't understand that it's not a contact thing where if I contact with it, somehow it jumps through my skin.
Yeah. No, that's very true. So there's very few infectious organisms in general, and in particular, not coronaviruses. They're not going to go through your skin. It's the whole touching of your face issue. And honestly, that's one of the problems with the masks too. Like people are always futzing around with the mask, and that just makes you more likely to touch your face. Which is why I like the face shield also. It's because like nothing's touching my face. So I'm not. It's even more. It's tough to get your hands up inside of there
Right.
to touch.
Yes, good point.
So yeah, I see people touching their masks all the time, and then you have a contaminated mask, and it's inches away from your eyes. It's inches away from your nose. Yeah.
Good point. So the only value that I've heard about the gloves that might make sense is that you may be less likely to touch your eyes, pick your nose, do whatever else because you got the gloves on. Yeah. But again, I think as a proxy for your hands, I mean, it's the same.
Yeah.
Nothing changes there. So, okay.
And honestly, I was going to say when in the anthrax situation, you actually double glove and you basically have two pairs on and you keep on removing and replacing the outer pair like very frequently. And then the second pair is in there to basically be a complete barrier and everything. So, yeah.
I guess if you're going to use disposable gloves, and that's Ian's recommendation, go double up and change them often.
Yeah, without a doubt, changing them often. A lot of people have sensitivity to wearing gloves, though, too. Latex sensitivities, and once again, it gets wet in there. Like wearing those 24/7 is probably going to give you skin problems. Whereas,
I think more people are interested. Like they go to the grocery store. What's the value of having gloves on your hand? Do you wear gloves when you go to the grocery store?
I don't.
Okay.
I do wash my hands regularly.
Yeah.
Soap and water is the way to go.
Whatever else. Okay.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about, I think, the same misconception about this particular virus in the food that we're ordering from takeout.
Yeah. So all indications are that it's not an oral pathogen. Like if you eat it, it's not going to be an issue.
So even if somebody that's infected sneezes on your food and you eat it, I mean,
it's a little bit tough for me to say that. It's not like it's zero chance because people can cough it back up, they can inhale food, but food that goes down your esophagus into your stomach, you're not going to get coronavirus from that. That being said, if you're coating your airways, your airway and your alimentary canal is the same thing for a couple inches. So there's probably some
chance
there. That being said, there's a lot of environments that are not, and the studies simply haven't been done. But whether a salty surface, whether an acidic surface, whether a fatty surface like food, whether that's an environment where this envelope virus can hang out and still be viable is a pretty tough question. I mean, I'm not sure if you've heard anything about this, but this virus is enveloped. That means it has a little fatty membrane, and it needs that membrane to be infectious. And that's one reason why soap and water works so well. The soap breaks down that fatty membrane, just like it pulls grease off of pans and stuff like that. So if a food is basically an unfriendly environment, that could very well knock down the infectious rate of the coronaviruses that could be on the surface too.
So, I mean, how often are you ordering takeout?
I don't.
You don't? Okay. Well, you guys, if I remember, you have this nice garden in the backyard. And
no, I was going to say I'm generally not a takeout kind of guy. This is one of those things of like I've never, like those games you play, I've never actually ever in my entire life had food delivered. Um, I've had takeout, like I've gone and grabbed food and brought out myself, but I've never had like someone show up at my door. I'm tempted to do it now, simply like as a kind of a supporting our local restaurants thing. But I tend to be a make it at home from scratch, whether it be from my garden in the backyard or something like that. I tend to make it myself. That's all.
So if you did order,
Yeah,
you order a pizza,
yeah,
shows up.
yeah.
You doing anything special when that box arrives?
I'm not. I have to admit, I haven't thought about it much. Are people spraying it down with sanitizer and stuff?
I think really more they're wiping it down with
Yeah.
disinfectant, just saying that, whether there's something on the surface or not, let's,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's no downside, right?
No, yeah, there's not. And the little that I've seen about studies for that, about it lasting, the coronavirus lasting a decent amount of time on abiotic surfaces. So like things like cardboard or plastics and stuff like that seems to last a decent amount of time. But that's, once again, I was talking about earlier, it was unclear to me whether in a food situation, whether a food environment is basically a nice environment for those coronavirus to hang out on and stay viable and stuff. But I don't know if anyone's ever, I have seen no data on that.
We do know that you don't touch the box and then pick your nose.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to touch your face.
I mean, I think that's the thing that people got to get used to understanding.
Yeah. It's funny. It's as a I guess this is related to this, but Zoo, my partner, so I bike to work every day. And so every day I have wind kind of going in my eyes. So I tend to get eye snots. And she gets on my case for having eye snots. I'm like, I've been trained as an infectious disease person. I've been trained to not touch my eyes. So like at most I'll use my shoulder and try to do stuff, but like there's a certain level of habit that keeps me from touching my face unless I really need to.
All right. So, but generally speaking, the surface contact, and then you do something in your eye or ear or whatever, or the propellant that everybody is you've heard it a million times.
Yeah. The touch is much more dangerous than the airborne stuff, though. Like it's much more likely to get infected from touch.
That's what we're telling our staff as well. It's like, that's great that you want people to have masks and things like that, because the distancing has to do with their theory of how far a propellant will go if they do sneeze or cough, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's not because, and again, I think a lot of people get the willies now when they're within 3 feet of somebody, just passing by them as if that's all, that's it. You just you passed into the zone and you just gave it to me.
Yeah, no, and that's most of the things that I've seen too. People are really suggesting that there's a decent amount of time you have to be within close proximity to people too. It's not just
University of Washington. Yeah, the some of the early stuff from the University of Washington, their medical team or whatever, or maybe it was the state of Washington, suggested it was within 6 feet for 10 minutes.
Yeah, right.
And I'm sure that's based on that infected person has to expel enough stuff.
Yeah,
because it's not like one little virus piece gets on you and you're done.
Yeah, I mean it tends to be probability, and so like you could be really, really unlucky in that one piece of matter, but it's more like a bell curve type situation where the more that you have around you, that will then become a realistic probability if you're within that zone for whatever the 10 minutes is or whatever. So
okay, so be way more cognizant of surfaces than the air or whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
Talk about herd immunity.
Yeah.
So hear that news all the time. You have an idea as a layperson what herd immunity is.
Yeah.
Somebody that understands it. Explain that.
Yeah. So basically, it's the whole idea that in order for a disease to continue, it has to have enough movement from one person to another so that it adds up. That you have more than one. If a sick person infects less than one other person, it'll just slowly fade away and it won't be around anymore. So every infectious disease has to have more than one person infected from another person. And that is basically an interplay of whether the disease-causing organism just can come into contact with another person. That's what we've been talking about, whether it be your hands or through aerosolized droplets or something like that. That's the movement. But it has to come into contact with a, I guess I would call receptive prey. It has to go into someone that can be infected. And if effectively more and more people cannot be infected, ultimately you'll have less than one person being infected by the one infected person. So that number is different for different types of infectious organisms. It's usually, so they're saying right now, I think 60% of the population would have to be resistant or immune before we'd really start losing the coronavirus. But things with higher spreadability rates. So right now they're thinking that the coronavirus has this spreading rate of about like 2.1 people are infected for each one person that's infected. That's middling, I would say. Things like measles has a 12. So a single person with measles infects 12 other people. And that's why, as of late, when people have been getting fewer and fewer measles vaccines, once you drop below like 96% immunity, then people start getting it because measles has spread so well. So the number of people you need to be immune to have herd, quote unquote, immunity is dependent on the infectious organism. And that 2.1 or so infection rate that coronavirus has then kind of calculates out to something around 60%. But if it's a lot more infectious like measles, you have to get up to the 90+% range to actually have that herd immunity.
Interesting. Look at that. We're all going to be like infectious disease experts after this.
Well, people are learning a lot right now, and it's making people like realize how important this stuff is.
So let's play a little would you game or what if game or whatever.
Yeah.
You have this virus. We're all at some point going to come in contact with it.
Yeah.
Is it better to be one of the early ones? I forget about the issue with the fact that, if everybody gets it all at once, the hospitals can't handle it. And that's really the key issue. Yeah. But in general, I actually had I saw something posted somewhere. I don't remember who asked it, but it was like, so I'm not quite the age of the high risk group, but I'm not far from it. So is it better for me to get it now while I'm younger and healthier than getting it 5 years from now?
Good question. I mean, I think about it. I mean, I've thought about it precisely myself. But there's a lot of factors in that. So I have said I almost want to get it now and get it over with. I'm feeling pretty healthy. And in a sense, everything is shut down. I'd rather get it while nothing's going on rather than waiting 4 months, everything opens up again, and then I can't run my business because I'm truly sick. But I'm also like, I don't have any risk factors. Maybe I'm getting a little old, but I have no other risk factors besides the fact that I'm pushing 50. So I'm pretty unlikely to truly die from it.
And I think that's the thing. People that are asking this question are in that similar kind of mindset. It's like, I'm healthy now. I'm getting into my, 50s, late 50s, whatever. And it could be because until we have like really availability of testing for both the antibody and to see if you have it, if you're positive, and ultimately a vaccine.
Yep.
So, and that vaccine would be the proxy to you actually getting it, right? So you put the antibodies into your, I think people a lot of times don't really understand what vaccines are. Can you explain real quick what a vaccine is?
And I was about to get to that because I've done a fair amount of research on vaccines. Both the anthrax vaccine and part of my PhD work was actually developing a technology it was more like it was like a technology for vaccines. So it can be applied to lots of different types of situations when you're trying to make a vaccine. It's actually been used for cancer as of late. But so it sounds like you kind of know in general, the idea is simply to have a person exposed to something that looks enough like the infectious organism that they gain resistance to that infectious organism. Sometimes that's a version of that infectious organism that's just like not that deadly. That's essentially what the smallpox vaccine is, the cowpox virus. It's a living virus, but it was really evolved for cows, so it's not that good at killing humans. So that's where the word vaccine came from, vaca, cow, because the milkmaids that used to milk cows once upon a time when they were resistant to smallpox because they got exposure to cowpox, and that gave them smallpox resistance. So that's where actually the word and concept of vaccine came from.
This is high value stuff right here.
Yeah.
We have just created some Jeopardy champions.
But something that I'm a little bit that's not being addressed right now is everybody's working on the assumption that we can make a vaccine. There's lots of organisms out there that we don't have vaccines for. HIV, the flu. They have to basically reformulate the flu vaccine every friggin' year because we don't have a flu vaccine that's universal. This virus, too, is a variety of virus that has a pretty high, without going deep into biology, it has a pretty high mutation rate one would predict. And that could mean that you make a vaccine right now, and then 6 months from now, a year from now, you have to make another vaccine, just like we have to do with the flu. So yeah, I would actually say it's most likely we can make a vaccine, but it's not a given, and everyone's acting as if it is a given. So we have to have viable alternatives. We have to think about other things that we can do if we can't have a vaccine ready in 18 months to 2 years is what they're saying is the soonest.
So anything with the wealth of knowledge and microbiology that you have, is there anything that's keeping you up at night when it comes to COVID?
I am much less afraid of the virus and the disease than I am of the social ramifications of it. People getting crazy, social unrest, things like that. As bad as it is, even with like a 1%-ish mortality rate or something, that should not be the end of our civilization. The end of the civilization could happen by people going crazy and letting fear get the best of them. So no, I don't want everybody or 1% of the population to die, but we do have to keep it a little bit in perspective. It should not destroy our civilization if we don't let it.
All right. Well, enough of this heavy, dark stuff. Is there anything else you think that the average Joe non-scientific person should really understand, or did we kind of cover the basics?
We've gotten most of it. Something I would say though is that this whole situation is not unheard of. We've had, certainly everyone talks about the 1918 flu. That was really bad. But we've had similarly bad things in the 50s and stuff like that. We had the quote unquote Asian flu at that time too. I think part of the issue now though is social media, and there's a certain level of hyper awareness and positive feedback, fear feeding upon fear, that is just magnifying the negative results. I mean, yes, we should be doing something, but that you have to toe a fine line between hysteria and wisdom, and sometimes it's tough. It's tough to see that line between those two things.
That is definitely one of the downsides to what we have today as far as the way we get information, and the fact that anybody with any thought can find a cohort that has that same thought.
Yeah.
They get together and they can attract other people that maybe didn't really quite have the thought, but they were persuasive enough. And now suddenly you have this. We're seeing this with 5G.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very large percentage. There's a large enough movement that it's causing issues. Of people that believe that 5G is somehow going to like sterilize people or hurt them or whatever, to the point where there are organized efforts to take 5G towers down, and they're starting to actually do that, destroy equipment, because they're so much in fear of what they've been told 5G is going to do to you.
Yeah.
So that would not have been
like that.
About social media.
Yeah.
That ability to get all those people riled up
Yep.
wouldn't happen. So, all right.
Yeah.
Well,
And like I was saying, so like I think it was like 1956 or something was when the quote unquote Asian flu was, and it was pretty bad, but it the world did not get riled up about it. It was basically one of those things, or was part of the norm. That happens every couple of decades. You get something like that, and you take your hits, and unfortunately try to move on.
well, suffice it to say, we will see a lot of lessons being learned
Yeah.
from this. All right,
Yep.
let's switch gears here. Let's
Mhm.
talk about something way more interesting.
That's what I have coming up next.
Right? It's like, I don't need to be seen. Just look at this. Talk to me. Is it vitae?
Vitae.
Vitae. Vitae is the proper pronunciation.
Yep.
All right. So you are a professor, a very prestigious position at the University of Virginia. You have this renowned for being able to deal with anthrax. I mean, these are all pretty heavy things.
Yeah.
How does the pivot happen to making spirits?
I would say it was not one thing. A lot of things add up. And a portion of the equation was that I was becoming more and more disenchanted with my daily job. I knew when I was getting my PhD, when I was in graduate school, even during my postdoc, that I'd be writing grants and stuff like that. That's the lay of the land. But honestly, especially the anthrax world that I was in, a decade or so had passed since it was a thing in the news, and so funding started drying up, and it became more and more difficult to get money. It wasn't a situation where I was necessarily afraid of not getting money, but the process had all changed with less money. Um, the committees that kind of decide whether you get grants became much more conservative with a little c, conservative, where they wanted higher and higher probabilities of things working. Like, so they want to grant what it's like 99% likely to work.
It's almost like do the work first, do the research first.
Many of my colleagues, I'm not squealing, do the work first and then do the grant, so that essentially they know the answers already.
Yeah.
And for me, as like a research scientist, that's no fun. Like, I mean, that's exactly what I don't want to be doing. I want to be doing cutting edge, high reward type stuff. And if I know what's going to be the results, why do I want to do it? So that started kind of making it less attractive to me. And like, I had a bunch of things happen in my life that made me reassess the value of all the years I had left. And looking at my life at the time, I would have regretted if I spend the rest of my life doing what I was doing and wasting, quote unquote, wasting those years.
But how do you go from that to then? I mean, it's fun to think about making beer and distilling spirits or whatever, but it's not like something you just. It's not like, I'm going to become a distiller.
No. And I had luckily, because of the Glomski family being in the wine business, and me being a part owner of both Page Spring Cellars and Arizona Strongholds, I was fairly involved with them. Back in 2007, before I went to my actual professorship at the University of Virginia, I worked the crush in 2007. So I was driving trucks and forklifts and cutting grapes and doing all that type of stuff. So I worked in the vineyards for a little bit, as well as the winery. And ever since then, I've been on the board of directors. So I've been pretty intimately involved in the alcohol business. And I looked at kind of the alcohol world because I liked producing alcohol. Beer, to some degree, as an industry, was looking somewhere much closer to saturation or plateau. So that wasn't that attractive to me. Wine, I like wine, but there's a massive amount of capital you need to buy all the land and farming. I had no interest in farming really either. So, and I had been playing with a still in my garage for a number of years. And the kind of craft distilling movement was getting up and running. So I saw much more of a ground floor to get in on. And that kind of started catching my attention. I started going deeper and deeper it and making business plans and looking for investment and doing all the research and stuff. So
you go. You switch gears and you pivot, and
yeah.
there you have it. So, what are you to this day or nowadays? What are you distilling?
So we focus on rum is our primary product. We make gin too, which ironically is our most awarded product, even though I consider myself a rum distiller. And we make some liqueurs also too. So liqueurs are basically anything that has a bit of sugar in it. So we have some liqueurs also. And we ended up with that repertoire kind of because of the structure of the distilling world in Virginia. So somewhat indirectly,
You have to sell your product through the state-owned liquor stores, right?
yeah. So Virginia is a control state. So my only customer in Virginia is the state. They're the only, like I sell every single bottle I have to the state one way or another. But I focused on rum and gin and liqueurs partly because the Virginia government, to some degree, subsidizes whiskey production. So if you sign a contract saying that 70% of your starting materials comes from Virginia, then you're able to apply for these really big agricultural grants. And I make rum that comes from sugarcane. You can't grow sugarcane this far north. So 95+% of the production in Virginia is whiskey because we grow a lot of grain. So there was really a niche in the market for things that are not whiskey. And so that's why I started focusing on these niches that were really underserved in our market. I don't get agricultural grants because of it, so I'm a little bit of financial disadvantage, but I'm fulfilling a need that is underserved.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So at this point, because it's controlled by Virginia,
Yeah.
unless you get lucky and go to Virginia, which I did, here in Arizona, it's going to be tough to get their hands on.
Well, we're trying to fix that.
All right.
So, yeah. So I have not committed to memory all of the ins and outs of the licensure, but we are currently in the process of doing it all officially. I just turned in my application to be a out-of-state craft distiller in Arizona. And what that actually means is that if all falls into place, we'll be selling those bottles you just had in your hand in the Page Springs Cellars tasting room in the not too distant future.
Wow.
We're aiming to have it all set up by Tilted Earth, which is essentially summer solstice. So we'll have Vitae Spirits cocktails ready to go while listening to some bands.
All right, all you Page Springs fans.
Yeah.
The brothers Glomski are going to bring it on.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know it, but Page Springs has brandy now too. So that's part of the reason why like Page Springs will be able to sell this stuff because they're getting their whole distiller license all put together and everything too. So
you gotta love it when a plan comes together.
Yeah. The kids wouldn't understand that quote.
Right. It's okay. Us old guys can just hang on, just keep it to ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you spending the time.
No problem.
This is a lot of information, but I think the credible sources kind of thing. That's really my whole gig. And so when I basically really want to try to get us an unbiased kind of opinion about anything, or some educated feedback on a specific subject that I certainly don't have a background in, I turn to the smartest people I know, and I appreciate you spending time with me.
Well, I think you're doing a great series here too.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I'm doing it for me, really, and if other people like the content, great. But I learned a lot just talking to you, and
awesome.
Others do great. So,
cool.
So hopefully we'll see you soon, either here or there.
Yeah, and
in person.
Yeah, no, that's it. If things start moving again, I'll be down in Arizona, not too distant future.
All right. Well, you all know me. You know I've been drinking the wine the whole time. That's half the reason why I had you go full screen. Eat my wine while I'm talking to you. All right. Be well, my friend.
Thank you.
All right. Talk to you.
Bye-bye.